already. We started midway through the story a little bit, but what we've previously seen, the curtains closed on our last scene. Connor was preaching through Acts 25 and 26. And where did we find Paul? Standing trial once again. Some things are drawn out extra super duper long, especially when it comes to trials. But at this point with Paul, it's getting ridiculous. Paul's been in prison now for over 2 years. He's been brought by various authorities of all different kinds, from his own people and then from Roman authorities and others, to defend himself against charges that are so vague that nobody really knows what to write about him. Nobody really knows what the charges are against Paul. And so, continuing in this uncertainty, Paul is forced to appeal to the highest court in the land. He's forced to appeal to Caesar. And so, as the curtains open on our scene here this morning, as we are in Acts 27, and we'll round the corner into 28 for just a little bit, this scene, Luke is documenting Paul's voyage to Rome to stand trial before Caesar. Become a missionary, they said. Travel the world, they said. It would be fun, they said. But this is hardly a Mediterranean cruise. For Paul, there's no poolside lounge chairs, there's no swim-up bar, there's no endless buffet, there's no nightly entertainment. Paul had some freedom, and the text tells us that he had some, but he didn't have freedom to be hitting a bucket of balls off the Lido deck. That's not what's going on here. Paul is on this voyage from Caesarea to Rome, covering most of the Mediterranean Sea, so he can stand trial before Caesar, the highest court in the land. And so what we see in this text, and we didn't take the time to read verses 1 through 8. There's a lot of different words and places and logistics. And so Luke's recording the logistics for us simply to document the voyage. And it's really helpful if you had a map in front of you, which, thankfully we provide. Every once in a while we come through, right? If you have a hard copy Bible, which I know some of you still carry these, and I encourage it, but I know we're moved on to technology, and so if you have your tablet or your phone and stuff, a lot of times you have maps in the back of your Bible. You'll have something similar to this, or pull it up on your phone, or if you've picked up a manuscript and you want to zoom in just a little bit more, turn to page 6 of the manuscript and you can pick that up. But what you're going to see is, as we work through this text, some of the different places that Paul and company, and we focus on Paul because it's documenting his journey to Rome, but you're going to see some of the port cities that they hit. Luke highlights who are some of the cast and crew that's a part of this ship's voyage. He's going to narrate some very helpful information about the cargo and the vessel and the ship change that they make. It's just like, this is not a Mediterranean cruise, and it's hard for us to really place ourselves there, but it's like they make a ship change partway through, and it's not an easy thing to have a layover in a port city, shuffling prisoners and all that kind of stuff, soldiers, and so that's what's going on in this first section. But one of the things that I think is very helpful for us to notice is that Luke mentions that Paul, a prisoner, was shown very kind treatment by the Roman centurion Julius. This kindness is abnormal. Where else in the world and where else through Scripture have we seen the Romans showing kindness to prisoners? This is such a rare thing that it should strike us as odd, and we should take notice of it. The text doesn't tell us why Julius showed Paul kindness or favor. We can speculate. We have some different ideas, some options. But I think it's helpful to note that because he was allowed this opportunity to have leeway around the boat, to have some freedom, his companions, Luke and Aristarchus, they were able to minister to him while they're on this voyage. And it's a long voyage. And so this voyage, as we have just read, we read most of it, is met with several challenges. And the most fearful threat to many on this voyage on board is weather-related. We're told that the progress is slow due to winds, and it was very difficult for them to finally make it safely to Fair Havens. Now, Fair Havens is a port of Crete, and so if you see that on the map, they've already traveled up around Cyprus to Myra, to Sindus, and now they're going down toward Crete. This is the place where Titus would be pastoring at Crete, and so if we move into some of those letters later on, the church is planted there, and so they finally lodge at Fair Havens. And the problem is, one of the problems, is that they end up having to stay longer at Fair Havens than they've anticipated. And so the fast is over, and the fast that Paul is referencing, or Luke is regarding here, is the Day of Atonement. This would have happened during the Jewish month of Tishri for us. It's the end of September, the beginning of October, and so that holiday, that day is way in the rearview mirror at this point. And so it's late in the season, and what we do know, if we know anything about being on the high seas, whether it's the Mediterranean or even closer to home, the Great Lakes, around this time, we can be dealing with some major storms. And so Paul weighs in on the conversation as the centurion, the captain, and the boat's owner are all trying to make plans. Paul feels like his rapport with the centurion allows him to speak into the situation. Look at verse 10. Paul says, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only to the cargo and the ship, but also our lives." That's a bold move by Paul. We have to remember that Paul is still a prisoner. We think much of Paul, and we should, right? We have most of our New Testaments based on his writings, and yet Paul oversteps in some ways, or he really believes that the relationship he has with the centurion allows him to be able to speak into this moment and say, hey, I have a suggestion. And we have to remember that this guy is still a prisoner at this point. And so it appears that the ultimate decision lay with the centurion. And so what he did is collaborated with the captain and the owner of the ship, and he valued their input more than he valued Paul's. That makes sense. Think about it. You put yourself in the position of the centurion. Are you going to listen to the ship's owner and the ship's captain, or a prisoner? So it makes sense why the centurion did what he did. And ironically enough, Fair Havens doesn't seem to be a port city that is good enough to spend the winter there. Fair Havens. And so they're like, okay, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me, but they knew better than I did. I've never been there. And so instead of spending the winter there, they decide to go down the coast, and they're still going to be on Crete, but they think Phoenix, that's a better choice to spend the winter there. And we go, oh yeah, that sounds warmer, right? Not the Phoenix, Arizona, Phoenix on Crete, okay? So you're just down the coast a little ways, and for whatever reason, that was a better port city to spend the winter. And so conventional wisdom tells us to do what? Trust the experts. And the experts in this situation were the captain and the owner of the ship. So everything seems to be going according to plan. They make the plan, they're working the plan, and we get to verse 13, and it looks like everything is going according to plan. Verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete. Plans were going smoothly. The weather was cooperating. But we know that things can go sideways rather quickly. And in this scenario, they did. What started off just perfect. It's like, man, they're sunning themselves on the deck. Everyone's happy. Look at verse 14. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. Things went sideways very quickly. When the storm or the wind has a name or a title, that's a big deal, right? You don't want to be traveling in some kind of weather that's named. Anytime I read this passage, I have Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald playing in my mind. I'm from the Upper Peninsula, and the gales of November are nothing to be messed with. Lake Superior can be like an ocean on its own, and this scenario on the Mediterranean, what we're reading about in Acts 27, was worse than that. So the ship was caught in a violent storm, and the captain and the crew, they're doing everything humanly possible, everything that they can to stay on course, to keep the ship intact. But you can only fight the elements for so long. At some point, you have to pivot. You have to shift gears. And these are seasoned sailors. And they do. They do everything that they can. They make the adjustments necessary. But when you look at verses 15 through 17 and what it relays, it's telling us about the dangers and the fears that they faced. They face being toppled and just really the ship being crushed by the waves and the winds and running aground and even sailing all the way off and crashing along the coastline of Africa, northern Africa. That's what they're dealing with. By the time we get to verse 18, it indicates the threat level. When they start throwing the cargo overboard to lighten the ship, you know it's life and death. Why? Because that's their money. They're not just going to carelessly throw money into the sea. And yet, they're lightening the ship, throwing the cargo overboard. And then it got even darker. If you look at verse 19, the crew is jettisoning all the gear, the rigging, the equipment, the extra stuff that they would need in case something goes wrong, a line snaps. They need to tie down something quickly. They need to do what they do as sailors. They're throwing all that extra gear overboard. That's a very difficult decision to make as the captain and crew. There is now no margin for error. This would have been a very difficult and dangerous, potentially an expensive decision. So all these things that they're facing, because this storm is upon them, it's life-threatening. It's threat level red for them. And we get to verse 20, and we read just how dark it got. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. We've not seen sun or stars for many days. Storm-tossed, weather-beaten, all hope of being rescued was finally abandoned. Have you ever met this dark moment when you feared for your life? Some of us have. Hope is a powerful motivator. Hope is something that gets us through some of the darkest moments. It helps us navigate some of the most challenging realities of life. Hope can cause us to respond in extraordinary ways, but when all hope is abandoned, well, the way we process goes really dark. We start making choices that we would not normally make. Hope is a powerful thing. And in this moment, in this text, all hope was abandoned. The crew's depleted in every way. Physically, they're drained from endlessly working night and day, tirelessly, to try to navigate the storm that they're in. They're working around the clock. It's 24/7. It's all hands on deck, and they are doing this without food, without sleep. I know how I get without food and sleep. And then you start snacking days. It gets really dark really fast. But they're fighting for their lives in this moment. Emotionally, they're completely spent. They've given up all hope of rescue. They believe 100% that they're doing all this for nothing because they're going to die. They believe that they're going to drown. So it's in this moment that Paul got up and said, "Men, I told you so." Don't we love that? It's like, great. Good timing, Paul. We all love a good "I told you so," right? That's awesome. But we often use it, or we often hear it when someone's trying to rub our face in it. That's not what Paul's doing here, okay? He's not trying to rub their face in it, but what he's trying to do is get them to think, here's what he said before, and he's bringing it up because he needs them to listen to him now. They weren't willing to listen to the prisoner early on, but now they need to pay attention. They need to listen. Here's what Paul says, "Men," verse 20, "you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet, now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid.'" Paul, do not be afraid. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. This is a very climactic moment that hangs in the balance. Death's grip is pulling this crew, these sailors, these soldiers, this prisoner, everyone who's aboard this vessel are being pulled down to the depths. And Paul stands up in this moment, in the darkness, when all hope is abandoned, amidst the wind and the waves, and he tells everyone to take heart. Do not abandon all hope. Do not fear. Be encouraged. Why? Because Paul had received a message from God. Regardless of what God these sailors and soldiers worshiped, they probably worshiped a variety of gods. And maybe they worshiped no God at all, but most of them were at the very least superstitious. And so Paul took this moment to glorify God in their midst. And he didn't just describe this God as the God whom he worshiped. Everyone worships something. We can all relate to that. All have some kind of deity that they follow and worship. They're no stranger to that. But he takes it one step further. He doesn't just say, this is the God whom I worship, but the God to whom I belong. For Paul, it was personal. It was relational. And Paul urged them a second time to take heart. Be encouraged. Literally, it means to have your heart return. It's almost as if when they abandon all hope, they cast their heart into the sea. And he says, take heart, be encouraged. Have your hope, have your heart return to you. Why? Because Paul has faith in God that God is going to come through on his word. That's crazy. It's one thing for you personally, for me personally, to have faith, to have confidence. But when we're completely depleted, to try to have hope or confidence or faith in someone else's faith, this is a dark moment. And just when all hope is lost, hope seems to flicker like a distant star with the promise of rescue. As we approach a text like this, I think there's often a fine line between spiritualizing the text and finding some meaningful relevance to our lives. We sit nearly 2,000 years removed from this scene. And I want to tell you something shocking. Maybe you should sit down for this. We're not Paul. Thanks. You sat in your office this week, and this is what you came up with, Giles? Excellent. We're not Paul. But that's what we often do. We read a passage like this, and this is how God worked in Paul's life and specifically. And so then we take the specifics of that and we try to apply them to our lives. I know it's no shock that we're not Paul, but we have to be careful when we're making application from passages like this. I think it's very poor connection when we say, this is how God worked and all the details in Paul's life, and so it's a promise for me that, as I'm facing the storms and trials and whatever in life, that God's going to get me through alive, unscathed. And we name it and claim it. I think that's a poor connection. I think there's a better connection from this passage that we can resonate with, and that is what Paul's words were, is to take heart. Be encouraged amidst the storms of life. We all use this imagery. We're not strangers to it. I don't think it's an overreach to talk about the storms and the trials and the suffering in our life, the darkness that we face as storms. I think we can all resonate with that. But we're encouraged to take heart amidst the storms in our life because the God whom we worship is the God to whom we belong. That anchors our souls. The God whom we worship, we gather here every week amidst the chaos of your life, amidst the storms, the trials that we face. And the God that we worship is the God to whom we belong, and He always comes through on His word. He's always faithful to His word. The God to whom we belong is personal and relational. He's journeying with us amidst the storms of heartache and loss. He's present and providing in the financial hardship. Sometimes we don't know how He's going to do it or where it's going to come from, but He comes through. He's healing us mentally and emotionally. He's an ever-present help in trouble. And so as we jump back into the text, we're driven and tossed with the winds with this crew's facing. They've been doing this now for 2 weeks. What we just read and talked about and tried to process for just a moment, they've been dealing with this 24/7, the wind and the waves and the darkness and the no sleep and the no food for 2 weeks now. And now they suspect sometime around midnight, it's hard to tell, but they're approaching land of some sort, some island, something. So they take a sounding. Boop, boop, boop. They didn't have sonar, so they do it a different way, right? And it's a lot more work. And they figure out that, okay, we're about 120 feet from shore. Take another sounding. 90 feet from shore. Unless fathoms is a normal language for you, any sailors around here, fathoms is not a good sound or a measurement for me. And so 120 feet, the next sounding 90 feet, and now their new fear is we're going to crash upon the rocks. We're going to hit this rocky shoreline, or some islands just have sheer rock cliffs. Not every place is easy to pull up to around an island. And so that's the new fear. And so what do? Look at verse 29. They let down all 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day. This is a massive ship. They have 4 anchors in the back, and they just let those things down, and now they're trying to stall. Let's go as slow as we possibly can. Let's figure out what we're dealing with, and we pray for day. We all know what that feels like. You've faced darkness. Regardless of what storms and trials you're facing, usually the nighttime is the worst. That's when you can't sleep, you can't turn it off. That's when you're hearing the voices and you're doing the self-talk, and it's not good. And all we can do is pray for day. That's what they're doing. So some of the crew decided, hey, let's pretend to lower some anchors, and really what they're doing is they're taking the ship's rowboat, which is their only safety, vehicle at this point, their lifeboat. It's the boat that they would go from the ship to shore if they can't port at a dock somewhere. This is the only vessel that they have to do that. And they try to escape. And Paul says, tells the centurion, if that happens, if these guys escape, you're not getting rescued. All bets are off. They need to stay aboard. And so now they do the most unthinkable thing that they possibly can do. And the soldiers go and they cut the ropes to this rescue vessel and they let that go into the ocean. Crazy. This is their only means of escape. Last possible option. This makes absolutely no sense from a human perspective, and yet this is what they need to do. Day's about to dawn, and Paul stands up one last time and he encourages this crew to take some food. They're going to need the strength for this last epic push to shore. So Paul promised them that not a hair on anyone's head is going to perish. And then leading by example, look at verse 34. Paul took bread and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. The men were encouraged. They followed Paul's example. And when they finally finished this last meal, what did they do? They took all the rest of the supplies. And you have to know that they're on a vessel that what they're carrying, the cargo, is wheat. It's grain from Alexandria. So Egypt is supplying Rome with tons of grain and food. Rome is overgrowing, and so this is that. They eat their last meal and they throw the rest of the grain into the sea. All bets are off at this point. This is their last push. It was it. They're committed. There's no turning back at this point. They have no other options. And it's at this moment that I want us to take a moment and just hit the pause button and review what have these sailors, what have these soldiers, what has all the prisoners, the captain, the centurion, and the owner of the vessel, what have they been dealing with for the last 2 weeks? They've been facing tempestuous winds that have driven this vessel. It's caused them to do things that they don't want to do, but they're having to. They're having to pivot quite a bit. Now they're being violently storm-tossed. They're starting to throw the cargo overboard. Next, they throw all their extra gear overboard. And at one point, Paul told them, if you're going to stay alive, we actually have to run this ship aground. That's unthinkable. That doesn't make any sense. All of these things are stacking up. The helplessness, the hopelessness. At one point, they have to let down all the 4 anchors to slow this thing, and we're going to see in just a minute, they're going to be cutting those 4 anchors and letting them go completely to try to speed things up. These guys are not in control of anything. They're responding to everything that the storm, that the winds, that the waves are throwing at them. And then finally they do the most unthinkable thing, and they cut their only lifeboat away and they let it go. As much as we try to avoid situations where we feel helpless and hopeless, God is still on the throne. We absolutely despise not being in control. We hate everything about it. We hate how it feels. We don't like when things don't go according to plan, our plan. We absolutely hate not being in control. We don't like making the tough decisions that with every decision it keeps limiting us more and more and forces us to not have as many options. We all like to have the options. So we can pivot, so we can adjust, so we can do this instead of that, and have some semblance of control. We really don't like being completely dependent on God alone. And yet, this is where this crew was at, and that's something I think we can resonate with. When all of our efforts for control have slipped through our grasp. We have no other options, no other choices. We're forced to completely depend on God. We don't like it, it's uncomfortable. And yet, God's not abandoning us in this moment. And He's still on the throne. He's still in control. He's the same God that Paul called out to and says, this is the God I worship and the God I belong to, the God who's faithful to His word. So now we come to daytime, finally arrives. At last, sunshine, the break of dawn. But they didn't recognize the island that they were approaching. Plan A is to find a beach and try to run the ship aground on the beach. That's a great plan. It's a great plan A. And if you've journeyed with me for any length of time, you know what I think about plan A's. Plan A should always be drafted on toilet paper, because then you at least have some kind of use for the plan A. Because you know that anytime you're drafting plan A, it's never going to be just plan A. And that holds true here. They have to pivot. They have to improvise. Plan B, plan C. So plan A is, now they're cutting all 4 anchors, and they're making it as fast and as hard as they can for shore. They hoist the front sail, and they turn it to the wind. They do what good sailors do, and they're trying to speed this vessel up and then beach it in and then make the last push and swim for shore. And as they do that, they hit a reef or they hit a sandbar, whatever it was at that point, and it wedges the ship so tightly in that now they're being pummeled by the waves. The ship is going to be busted up, and now they're just going to have to swim for it. The soldiers, they have a fear. Their fear is that the prisoners are going to swim away and escape. So let's kill them. Centurion makes a judgment call in the moment because he wants to keep Paul alive, and he says, don't you dare kill anybody. And so now they're on to plan B or C, but the centurion says, swim for it. Anyone who can't swim, find a plank, find a board, find a floaty, find something. They don't have life jackets under their seats, right? Like we're all used to. So it's like find a plank and float toward safety. That's what's going on. So plan B or C at this point is just swim for it. Do anything that you can to stay alive. And that's what ends up happening. Eventually, they all make it there. They all swim or they float in safely. They all arrive at shore, just as God promised and just as Paul had pledged. So they all wash ashore alive, and you can imagine the relief, the high fives, but they're completely exhausted. They're soaked. They're tired. And as they wash up on the shore of this new island, new challenges confront them. They don't know what island they're on. Are the natives friendly or are they enemies? Imagine making it through this epic storm for over 2 weeks. You finally wash up on land. And now you get captured, taken prisoner, or something worse by the locals. Wouldn't that be great, right? We just finally made it and now something worse. But Luke tells us that the locals were how does he put it? Unusually kind, I think is the terminology. It's like, man, we didn't expect this kind of kindness. This is awesome. So let's make a fire. You know, this is just a whole crew of shipwrecked people, and now the locals are taking care of them, and we're starting to build a fire, and so they're cold, and they're wet, and they're exhausted, and then what happens? It begins to rain. Excellent, right? Just how we planned it, you know? These guys are just depleted. So they make this big bonfire, and Paul's helping contribute, and he gets this bundle of sticks, and he throws it into the fire, and we know what happens. A viper jumps out from the heat, latches onto his hand, and everyone's like, oh, here we go. The natives' version of karma is kicking in. And so the goddess of justice has got Paul. He must be a murderer. That's what they conclude. He must be a murderer. He made it through the sea, The goddess of justice got him, and he's going to die from the venom. And so Paul just shakes the viper off into the fire, and he warms himself, and everyone else just sits and waits. It's just a matter of time before Paul's going to succumb to the venom, right? And so they're waiting. They just keep waiting, and nothing's happening. Enough time goes by that they're like, I guess we were wrong, and they swing the pendulum from saying he's a murderer to going, he must be a god. You know, it's like, man, the jury can change so quickly, right? And so that's what happens. And now they wait. The local magistrate ruler, the guy in charge of this area, his name's Publius. He takes this whole band of misfits in and takes care of them, and feeds them and waters them, and does all of this for like 3 days. The text tells us that Publius's father is sick. He's on his deathbed. He's dealing with fever and dysentery. And so Paul comes in and makes the hospital visit, and he lays hands on him and prays with him, and Publius is healed. Well, you can imagine how word spread. Remember, they're shipwrecked here. They were going to winter in Phoenix on Crete. Now they're wintering here on Malta. So they're spending a lot of time here, and word spreads that this guy was healed. And so everyone with diseases and sickness start coming to Paul, and Paul, the prisoner, is healing all of these guys. And so when it's finally time for them to set sail and make the last push towards Rome, months later, because the locals were so well taken care of by Paul, they, and just with all the miraculous healings that were taking place, they load up the ship, they put all the supplies on there that they absolutely need, and they send them off toward Rome fully stocked with supplies. And that's where our journey ends this morning. The curtains close on this scene, and we've journeyed with Paul through violent storms, through shipwreck, being washed ashore. We've witnessed this crew driven and tossed by the storms, physically, mentally, emotionally, just depleted. And there is one thing that we need to be absolutely convinced of from this text. It's something that we need to be reminded of on a daily basis, is that Jesus is the one to whom we belong, the one we worship, the one who faithfully keeps his word. Jesus is the anchor of our souls. Jesus is the anchor of our souls. Regardless of what storms that we may be facing, Jesus holds us fast. Despite the perils that accompany this season in our lives, Jesus holds us fast. When our life faces shipwreck and all hope feels lost, Jesus holds us fast. He's the one to whom we belong. He's the one we worship. He's the one that's going to always be faithful to his word. Jesus is the anchor of our souls. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this text. As you've documented Paul's journey where he must stand on trial before the highest court in the land to testify of the sufficiency of the gospel. A crucified and resurrected Messiah who provides forgiveness of sins and life to those who believe in him. Paul must stand trial to pronounce the gospel before Caesar. And so as we've navigated this text, through this storm, through the wind, through the waves, we can relate to some of the challenges in life. And we need to be reminded that you, King Jesus, are the anchor of our soul. That regardless of what we're facing, you will hold us fast. That you are going to continue to be faithful to your word. That you are enough for us. To this we cling. In Christ's name.